Good evening and welcome to our all-night pirate movie festival. This is in the court of the Wenton King. And what do we do? I don't know what we do.
We review music albums.
We review music albums. What are we reviewing music album?
We've been reviewing Led Zeppelin recently.
Led Zeppelin.
It's our first series.
It's a tricky one. It's going to be a tricky one. It's the fourth Led Zeppelin album. It's not called Led Zeppelin IV. It's called Led Zeppelin now. In the MP3 age, it is listed as Led Zeppelin, and I think the only text written on the album was Led Zeppelin, written on the record, so that had to be the name of the album. But it also has 4 symbols, 1 symbol for each band member. It's a very famous album. This is tricky because it's like reviewing
The Bible,
or Dark Side of the Moon, or Sgt. Pepper or something. Sgt. Pepper would be easier for us because we're not big fans of it actually. But this we are big fans of. This is the album. This is the first album you buy if you're going to buy a Led Zeppelin album. The second album to be recorded at Headley Grange, which was a manky old house that was falling down and disgusting and had no heating. Page really liked it, obviously, because of that. Jethro Tull recorded there too. They recorded Aqualung. And interestingly, this was not a state-of-the-art studio. I think they had the Rolling Stones mobile studio. And for Jethro Tull, who had the big studio, the big posh one, Aqualung, their most famous album, not their best album, has terrible production. It sounds awful. Led Zeppelin IV, or the fourth Led Zeppelin album, has fantastic production. Shall we start with the first song?
Yeah, Black Dog.
Famous song, stop and start bit. They get accused of ripping off Oh Well by Fleetwood Mac, which is a weird thing because musically there's nothing in common with it. The only thing in common with it has stop-start verses.
For me, this is a bit of a change because the first track on the previous albums, it's had a very signature riff. So,
Yeah.
Immigrant Song, Whole Lot of Love. Yeah, very signature riff. This isn't like that. This is more like a song than just a riff.
Yeah, it is a riff, but there's a lot more notes in it.
Yeah.
It's a tune.
It's not got that simple hook.
Yeah.
As it that the other song
It doesn't. No, but it's certainly popular as an accessible riffy rocking song. Good guitar solo.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll. I think this is one of my favourite Led Zeppelin songs. There's nothing like this on Led Zeppelin III. This is where you see a big difference between 3 and 4. Is 3 has the folkiness and a sort of lack of accessibility, whereas 4, it's almost like they're listening to the critics who didn't like 3, and that this is a much more accessible album.
It still feels quite Led Zeppelin-y.
It's just a fantastic song. It's just great reading of rock and roll as it is. The next song,
Battle of Evermore.
The Battle of Evermore, back into the folky stuff. Guest vocalist Sandy Denny from Fairport Convention. Really atmospheric stuff. Nothing like they've done before. They've rarely repeated themselves, and this is a great example of where it's kind of something that they've done before. It's folky, but there's a slight Eastern flavour to it, and with lyrics. Well, people talk about the Lord of the Rings lyrics, and there are allusions to Lord of the Rings in it. It's actually about the eternal battle between night and day. Really, that's what the lyrics are really about. But it references Tolkien as well.
Yeah,
which is cool.
This is probably the most evocative song on the album for me, in terms of just the imagination of that it provokes. Like, I like the Battle of Evermore.
Great vocal performance.
Which brings us on to another song.
Yes. Okay. Impossible to review. Stairway to Heaven, the best song in the world. There's even a Tenacious D song which makes fun of it being the best song in the world. It is very, very well crafted. Lyrics don't have literal meaning. It's just phonetic meaning.
I mean, it's sort of similar to Bohemian Rhapsody sort of thing.
Yeah.
As this.
It's actually a much better song than Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, but it's not anywhere near as accessible.
No.
And it's not poppy in the slightest.
No.
And I think most people, on their first hearing of Stairway, would be quite disappointed because it's not all those things. Because of
they will be
reputation.
expecting the Bohemian Rhapsody thing. Yeah. In a way, Bohemian Rhapsody has replaced Stairway to Heaven as the famous rock song from the 70s, I think.
Yeah. No Stairway.
Denied. John Paul Jones was quoted as saying, people asked him, did you feel an aura the first time you played it? Because obviously a magical song, or I don't know, spiritual stuff. And he's like, well, no, they wanted to hear a whole lot of love. If you listen to the bootlegger the first time they played it, it was in Belfast. Everybody's talking. You can't hear it.
I have to admit, it doesn't play well as a live song to me. It's sort of, if I was going to a Led Zeppelin concert, I wouldn't necessarily be going to listen to Stairway to Heaven.
Okay, so next side.
Misty Mountain Hop.
Misty Mountain Hop. The reference to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably my least favourite song on the album. I still like it, but from 4, it's my least favourite song.
Yeah.
And this is an album that is spent for me, that I've heard hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's a good song.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's one of Plant's favourites.
I still quite like it. Next song.
4 Sticks. Dun, 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 dun. Again, nothing like they've done before. And there's maybe an Eastern influence in there, or an Arabic influence, or maybe a Moroccan influence with that. John Bonham playing with 4 sticks. I've no idea if that makes a difference to the song really at all, but he is playing with 4 sticks. Good song.
Yeah.
Followed by
Going to California.
Going to California. This is Plant's hippie stuff. He had hit his stride writing, and this is really him doing his thing, what he wanted to do. Great folk song.
Yeah. I think this is the most accessible song to the non-Zeppelin listener on the album.
Which brings us to the final track.
We always finish these albums on an epic track.
They certainly do.
Yeah.
In a way, this is the highlight of the album. I mean, obviously the Stairway to Heaven, but when the Levee Breaks is very, very special.
Yeah.
Very, very special indeed. The best example of Jimmy Page's production values. It's not well engineered. It's not clear. It's not about being clear and clarity of the sound. It's the vibe of the sound, the bluesiness. It almost sounds like an old blues recording, but with all this energy on it. And obviously the famous most sampled drum intro of all time, recorded in a stairwell, I think.
Alright.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The drums do give it an extra something.
Yeah.
They really drive it along, don't they?
Yeah. And obviously it's that killer riff. And it swirls around, and then at the end it doesn't have a normal ending, it has this real shock ending, which I think is great. I think that's one of the best endings to an album for any band. I think it's great.
It is the only album that I've owned on tape, on LP, on CD, no, digital version as well. And I realised, not that I didn't like it, but I think I've been sucked in by the hype around it. And it wasn't until I started looking at it objectively. For example, I would not think, okay, I've got a bit of time, what track would I put on? There's not one track on there, if I had a spare 10 minutes, say, out of all my music, there's not one track on there I'll put on.
That's interesting. Is that because the definitive songs on there are Stairway and When the Levee Breaks? And obviously Stairway is redundant.
Possibly. I think what it is I see it as a whole. Yeah, this is definitely an album. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And as such, I didn't really put singles on there, although I think Black Dog was released as a single and rock and roll. But it wasn't meant to be presented like that. And I see I don't really see undulations of good songs and not so good songs. I just see it as one whole thing, and therefore I wouldn't listen to an extract from that song. It's a bit like okay, Dark Side of the Moon, yeah.
Yeah.
I would not put one track of.
No, you wouldn't put any colour you like on. I might go and listen to any colour you like now.
But I think Dark Side of the Moon was designed to be listened to like that.
Well, yeah.
It runs together.
Yeah, it's one piece.
Abbey Road. Whereas these are 8 distinct songs.
Yeah, Dark Side was performed as one piece.
Yeah.
This was never performed as one piece.
No.
In fact,
And
no, they did play every song on there live, but not all together and not in that order.
yeah. I mean, there is something quite formulaic about this layout. It's sort of it's 4 songs aside. You end on a bit of an epic, Stairway, and When the Levee Breaks.
Starts with a rocker.
Starts with a rocker.
Yeah. Fergie song.
Yeah. So it doesn't feel particularly inventive like that. Yet it feels, in terms of albums, of what an album should be, from this point on, fairly definitive.
That's which is its problem. But it's also that's why it's there. That's why we know it so well. Led Zeppelin are one of those bands. They're so influential. You don't even talk about it because everybody's influenced by them. Even if it's just a tiny bit, they're sort of into the rock psyche so much you can't get away from them. Mm-hmm. And this album is where that's really happened. It's not their best album, but it is the starting point. If you were going to recommend a first Led Zeppelin album to someone, unless you knew something specific about their tastes, it would be 4.
I mean, there are no go to the toilet songs on this.
No.
They are all pretty. I mean, when you say Misty Mountain Hop's probably the least good on there, we're talking a very narrow band of goodness to not so goodness.
It is a high level of goodness, and it's about there, just off the screen up there. Of course, critics by this point hated Led Zeppelin, loathed Led Zeppelin. They are the devil. They are just shallow and mindless noise. And they go around smashing up hotel rooms and they're terrible, you know. Why is that?
It's because they were challenging the status quo or the relationship between critics and musicians, I think.
Yeah.
In the sense that a critic saw his job to maybe have something to say about the personality of the band members and the people in it rather than strictly the music.
Yeah.
Whereas Led Zeppelin were all about the music. And all about performing.
And this period of time was all about the music. And that's why it became, for a long time, uncool and became, the critics' target for years and years. And that's faded, that's gone. Because with time, the music still stands.
Yeah.
I think what happened was you had punk happened, lots of things happened. Lots of things happened in the 70s, and every few months a new thing would happen. New music all the time, all these fantastic bands, all these fantastic different types of music. And then punk was the next one that came along. But arguably that was picked up by the critics as their music that they could use to market, and the record companies as well. They could pigeonhole it, market it, and push it as something separate from everything else, which it isn't. I like The Damned, and I like Led Zeppelin, and I like ELP. It's allowed. I'm allowed to like all of them because it's all good. But there are the stereotypical music critic would never say that. They would say all the music was swept away by punk, which was different, and the new youth said, "Oh, I hate Led Zeppelin. It's crap. I just want to listen to the Sex Pistols now." And buy their records, and then buy the new records, and then buy the new records, buy the new band. It became a marketing machine. It became about fashion.
Which makes it incredibly easy to make records.
Yeah, and to make people famous, and then kick them out after a record and get a new lot of people in who will sign the same cheap record deal, do loads of interviews and talk to the press because they want to be talked to.
It's great marketing as well, a bit of controversy in it.
Yeah.
Get some arsehole in front of a camera.
So what we ended up with was fashion-based music, social music, which is different to the music we like. So we hope you've enjoyed this video. It was the hardest one to do, wasn't it? But hopefully we made it watchable. Join us next time for Houses of the Holy, which will be a lot more interesting and easy to review, I think.
I think so.
Goodbye.
You failed.
Oh.